Swadikap. Good morning from Thailand, everyone. I'm 𝐕𝐴𝐴 from SCG International Corporation. I'm very much honored to be the host for today's event. I believe we have people from around the world joining the conference today. Some people from the US, some people from Africa, Australia, and of course, Asia. So before we get started, I'd like to check if everyone can see me and hear me on the screen. So you may press 9 in the chat box if you hear me and see me on the screen clearly, right? So all right? 9, yeah, I can see that. So seems like everything is fine and perfect, and we're ready to get started for today's event. I'm pleased to officially welcome everyone to SCG International Global CONNEXT 2021. Reinventing today to meet tomorrow's challenges. SCG International has conducted the annual Global Update event for the past few years. However, for this special year, we people around the world face a lot of challenges, the challenge of tomorrow. So today, we'll spend time discussing about future sustainability trends with sustainable technologies and solutions through this virtual conference by distinguished speakers from different parts of the world. The program will split into 2 sections, which include the topics such as net zero carbon journey and trends, air quality and energy saving, electric vehicle and electrify, as well as the next generation value exchange, including modern e-marketplace, financial technology, and supply chain agility. So before we get started of this exciting program, first of all, I would like to invite Mr. Abhijit Datta, Managing Director of SCG International Corporation, to give official opening remarks to all of us. Please welcome Mr. Abhijit Datta.
Swadikap. Good morning and a very warm welcome to all of you wherever you are. Today we have together with us participants from all around the world, our customers, stakeholders, partners, employees, and friends. Thank you so much for sparing your valuable time to be with us. We have a great program today, great content, great speakers, and I hope you will enjoy the event. But first of all, let me spend a few minutes to talk about the background for today's conference. When we take a look at 2021, there are 2 broad narratives that come to mind. The first one is continuing disruptions. So the pandemic continued to grab the headlines. From the second wave to the third wave, from the Alpha to the Delta, and from lockdowns to reopening. On top of that, we had the shipping crisis. So in previous years, we used to have disruptions in the supplier country or in the destination country. But what we've seen in the last year is disruptions in what goes on in between. Yes, we saw the container shipping crisis triggered by an unprecedented hike in freight rates, which was caused, of course, by unprecedented container shortages. And finally, we had the energy crisis with unprecedented hikes in coal and oil prices, resulting in a lot of inflationary pressures. But despite all of that, there is indeed a second narrative for the last year. 2021 will also be remembered as a year of hope. Events restarted. So we had the Summer Olympics, we had the Eurovision, the Dubai Expo, vaccinations accelerated, and countries are reopening. Innovations, big ones, like SpaceX, but also startups. 40% of all the world's 800 unicorns actually achieved unicorn status in 2021, 40%. And finally, just a few weeks ago, we had the COP26 at Glasgow, which once again accelerated the focus of the world on sustainability. So 2021 is indeed a year of hope, and we can look forward to the future. So with that spirit in mind, we have selected our conference theme this year as Reinventing Today to Meet Tomorrow's Challenges. The challenges relevant for us for today's conference focus around three key trends. First, sustainability, a trend from dirty to clean energy, from dirty to clean mobility, and from more to less energy consumption triggered by efficient technology spending. The second trend is digital, a trend among B2B customers moving from physical to online. And the third is disintermediation, which is a trend for B2B sellers moving from physical sales channels to online end-to-end supply chains. So at SCG International, we are studying all of these trends, just like many of you, I'm sure. And while we look for a response to these challenges, we're all asking the question, what opportunities lie hidden behind these changes? Change is indeed an opportunity, and we all know the reason for that. Every time there's change, it brings with it a new business model. That business model causes conventional players to get disrupted. But the resulting vacuum actually opens up a huge white space. And this white space eventually gets filled up by a completely new set of players. Players who have been watching this with foresight, watching the opportunity far before the disruption actually occurred. And that's how they take advantage of the white space. So right now, as we speak, Zoom is filling the white space that was created by the disruption of what would have been a physical conference 2 or 3 years ago in a hotel somewhere. In the same way as food delivery apps are filling in the white space caused by COVID. So to discuss these interesting topics and to learn more about the issues and the potential opportunities surrounding them, we have 2 interesting sessions today. Session 1 is titled Navigating Future Sustainability Trends, where we have international experts from various industries who will bring in 3 different perspectives. The first one is from the world of real estate and workspaces. The second one is on technology driving healthy and efficient buildings. And the third one is around clean mobility and fleet electrification, or EVs, as we like to call it. Session 2 is around the next generation value exchange, where our own SCG International team will share ideas, thoughts, and initiatives, including real-life use cases, covering 3 perspectives. The first one is a modern e-marketplace. The second one is how financial technology, or fintech, is maximizing liquidity and driving trade. And the last one is what a new normal supply chain would look like in the future. So we look forward to some great content today. Finally, as I wrap up my opening remarks, I'm reminded that in previous years, we used to call this the global update. But a lot has changed since then. Today, what we need more than just an update is to connect. Because if we do, we can then share ideas, share capabilities, and actually try to build ecosystems to solve these problems together. So with that spirit in mind, may I have the pleasure to invite all of you once again to Global Connect 2021, and I hope you enjoy the event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abhijit Datta, for the opening remarks. I believe that all of you can see that we have a lot of challenges and a lot of exciting program ahead. Without further delay, let's get into the first section, Navigating Future Sustainability Trends. And it is our great honor to have Mr. Datta himself as a moderator. So please allow me a few seconds to give all of you a brief introduction of Mr. Datta. Mr. Abhijit Datta is the Managing Director of SCG International Corporation since January 2020. Having global presence in 20 countries, SCG International is a part of SCG Group, which is one of the leading industrial conglomerates in Asia. In February 2018, Mr. Datta joined SCG International as India Business Director. The appointment was a return to SCG Group after having served earlier with the group from October 1999 until June 2009 in various capacities, the last of which was a CFO of Long Son Petrochemicals Complex in Vietnam. Now I'd like to hand over the stage to Mr. Abhijit Datta and our distinguished speakers. Please give the big round of applause to all of them.
Thank you very much, Superkid, and welcome everyone to our first session, which is titled Navigating Future Sustainability Trends. We're honored today to have with us three world-class speakers who will share their thoughts, following which we're going to have a very interesting Q&A panel, which you don't want to miss. So may I start with a brief introduction to each of our three speakers today. The first speaker today will be Sam Mccree. Sam is APAC Solutions Lead Energy and Sustainability Services from JLL, or as everyone would know, Jones Lang LaSalle. JLL is a global real estate company. Sam leads the solutions development business at JLL's Energy and Sustainability team of sustainability experts. And Sam is a business leader with 20 years of experience supporting companies in managing their ESG challenges and advising clients on efficient business solutions across APAC and EMEA. And today, Sam is going to talk to us about the net zero carbon journey, global trends, and some important points about COP26. Our second speaker for today is Israel Bhiran. Israel is the founder and executive vice president of Enverit Systems at Boston. He's also former CEO and founder of Applied Cleantech Israel, a water treatment company, as well as founder COO of Molecular Cytomics at Boston, a medical diagnostics company. Israel is an executive and consultant in multiple startups in the medical, environmental, and energy fields. And finally, but not the least, our third speaker today is Alex Bettencourt, Senior Managing Director of Black & Veatch, a global organization providing innovative solutions to the world's most important needs. He's worked in critical infrastructure for his entire career and could assist many organizations in driving infrastructure modernization, ADMS, DERMS, distribution automation, digital substations, and so on, and developing businesses that leverage transportation, electrification, especially fleets. So those are our three speakers, very distinguished in each of their fields. So may I now start with our first speaker, Sam Mccree. Please join me in welcoming Sam, who will share her presentation. Sam Mccree, please.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Can everybody see my screen? I'm just going to check. Okay, fantastic. So as the introduction has stated, I'm from JLL, so I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes running through JLL's approach to sustainability. As I said, doing a bit of a deep dive on COP26, but more focusing on the challenges and some of the solutions. So if I move to the next slide, these are the four areas that I'm going to be focusing on. As the speaker mentioned, the race to net zero COP26 has just happened. So it's very important for me to kind of share my thoughts about what's happened, but more importantly, the takeaways from it and the action that's needed. And I think you'll find throughout my presentation, the word action is going to be raised quite a lot. So I would be remiss not to really start at the beginning and give a little bit of background. So we're 5 years on from the Paris Agreement. We've had this year the new UN IPCC report stating that we must plan for a 1.5 degree scenario or lower. So to do this, we're going to need to reduce reductions, and now, year on year, not 2030, not 2040, but now, if we're going to reach the 2050 target. So this really means aligning with science, and I will delve into what that actually means a little bit later. But I wanted to kind of set the scene by bringing it to Thailand. And I'm sure I don't really need to tell any of the participants the importance of this for Thailand. The impacts of climate change are becoming increasingly felt here in this region. The kingdom suffered the worst drought in 4 decades last year. Coastal areas, including Bangkok, are highly vulnerable to rising sea levels. Some are even forecasting that Bangkok could be underwater by 2050 if we don't take action now. So I'm not saying this to depress you, but I'm just trying to reinforce the importance of everyone acting now with pace and scale, especially I'm sure the participants in this conference. Businesses, the private sector has a crucial role to play given their impact, but more importantly, their ability to make change. So as we all know, COP26 happened and ended last week, the climate conference in Glasgow, and we saw some progress. So there was a shift away from fossil fuels, some tackling methane issues, some making commitments around protecting nature and biodiversity. But as we all know, there is still a long way to go to keep the 1.5 degree scenario alive. Next year, countries will regroup again at COP27 with the expectations of reductions over the last year, but stronger commitments. So in the run-up to COP27, businesses, as I said, will have a really important role to play. So if you haven't already, or if your business hasn't already, there will be a very strong expectation to set and implement your net zero carbon strategy. Also driving meaningful operational carbon efficiencies. More importantly, understanding your value chain. This is a big part of the process that many companies are going through at the moment. So understanding your scope 3s that I'll talk about a little bit later. And then finally, understanding your remaining emissions. But what is really positive, and I think you'll all agree with me, is the number of commitments that have been made either to carbon neutrality or net zero, and in some cases even net positive. So meaning ending deforestation, eliminating the use of fossil fuels, sourcing energy through renewable sources, and more importantly, offsetting more carbon than being released. But we've really observed this amazing rush of commitments. My company, JLL, has made a number of commitments, as has SCG, and many, many more companies are expected to follow post COP26. In this slide, I really just wanted to take a second to really ask the why are companies making these commitments. In my view and my company's view, business as usual is not an option anymore. If you adopt a business as usual approach, you're at risk of being left behind. It's important to adopt sustainability principles to future-proof your business. We're seeing companies such as Unilever that have transformed into purpose-driven companies, so putting people before profit, but reaping huge benefits. Research has shown that prioritizing sustainability positions you really well in terms of being business competitive, employee retention and attraction, obviously your brand reputation, but also around investor and customer appeal, as well as obviously boosting the bottom line. And I'll talk a little bit more. There was lots and lots of commitments made post in COP26 within the investment field. And we're going to see a huge growth in this area. As I'm sure you're all aware, we're seeing a huge population growth, especially in this part of the world. With urbanization comes increased demand for services, goods, and obviously energy, hence the increase in emissions. Here in Thailand alone, emissions per person have risen by something like 50% in the past 2 decades, and it sets to continue if there's no change. So how do we meet this growing demand whilst reducing carbon emissions? So to address this crisis, setting climate goals aligned to science and then executing on the goals will be crucial. Science-based targets provide a clearly defined pathway for companies to reduce their emissions, but also helping prevent the impacts. And as I said before, future-proofing your business. Targets are considered science-based if they align to the latest climate science. So that was what was deemed necessary to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So in a nutshell, limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees and pursuing efforts where we are actually right now, pursuing efforts to limit warming to below 1.5 degrees. So there are a plethora of definitions around what carbon neutrality is, what net zero is. Some are confusing, some are actually conflicting. So the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is a partnership between CDP, UN Global Compact, the World Resources Institute, and WWF, have recently published a corporate standard on net zero. So it's the world's first framework for corporate net zero target setting and is in line with climate science. So this standard includes guidance, criteria, recommendations for companies to set science-based targets consistent with limiting warming below 1.5 degrees. So it provides a common, robust, and science-based understanding of net zero. Essentially, the standard focuses on rapid and efficient emission cuts. So that includes your scopes 1, your own emissions, scopes 2, your electricity that you purchase, and scope 3 that's generated by your suppliers, but also your end users. Most companies, and this is really important in the standard, will be required to decarbonize up to 95% of their emissions. So this is a big difference between what is happening at the moment, where a lot of companies will offset, for example, up to 50% plus of their emissions. Now we're looking at only being able to offset up to 5%. Another big area that's very positive is the setting of near and long-term targets. And there will be a prohibiting net zero claims until you've actually met those long-term targets. So the aim is to avoid greenwashing or false claims. The last area I'd just like to share when we're talking around the science is going beyond the value chain. So going beyond the value chain to help mitigate climate change elsewhere. So leading companies may have the ability to do that to support other companies or countries that are not as fortunate to do so. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention the built environment. Obviously, I work at JLL. Real estate accounts for around 40% of global emissions, and in some cities it can be as much as 70%. So it really is important for my industry to respond to lowering their greenhouse gas emissions. So as urban populations continue to grow, studies have predicted that another 230 billion square meters of new building stock will be needed by 2060. So it's really crucial that corporates align their real estate targets to their climate goals. But first, why should the Built Environment Act? Probably quite an obvious question for most. It's obviously directly affected by climate change, from flooding to severe weather, but it also has the ability to be an agent for change. The built environment, it can be a solution Buildings have the ability, in some cases, to act like trees, capturing carbon, purifying the air, regenerating the environment. The design can incorporate nature-based solutions and materials that are far less carbon intense than, say, for example, steel or concrete. So I'm talking about timber or hempcrete that sometimes can be reduce emissions up to 50%. So in recognition of the importance to address ESG or sustainability challenges that we face, our clients are telling us that sustainability is up there as one of the top 3 decision-making factors in most of their business decisions. So what is this telling us? It's important as much as location and cost for the built sector. So this is across all of our clients, from building owners, developers, tenants, investors, all prioritizing ESG as part of their everyday business decisions. As I mentioned before, buildings are responsible for around 40%. This includes the embodied carbon, so how they're designed and constructed, but also their operational carbon emissions. The energy demand and the building stock will increase with population growth, we know for a fact. So we're going to need to manage the emissions and act with pace and scale. The expectation is that 100% of buildings that are due to be completed by 2030 are at net zero in terms of their operations, and at least 40% in terms of their embodied carbon, so how they're designed or constructed. When we are talking about 2050, all new and existing buildings will need to be at net zero carbon across their whole life cycle. That's a very ambitious challenge, especially with aging assets. So if you can imagine in your city, what could it possibly look like? Green, healthier, more climate resilient cities. So as well as constructing and designing more sustainable buildings, retrofitting existing buildings and transitioning them to renewable energy will be really important in moving the dial. I thought it would be really important to demonstrate to all the attendees that this is not just advice that JLL is passing on to our clients. We are also on this journey as well. So just touching a little bit on our sustainability journey. So we've actually been on this journey since 2015. We've had very strong internal leadership and very ambitious targets. Our global ESG lead has just returned from COP26, where we were sharing our story and our commitments. We have a very strong position to publish our commitments and also our achievements. And we do this year on year through our sustainability report. I'm not going to go into all the targets that we have, but just to highlight the 2 key milestones for us. The first is by 2030 for all our leased assets that we occupy to be net zero. The second, which is a lot more ambitious, is by 2040 that we will be net zero across our entire portfolio. That includes our scope 3, and we've done this through signing up to the climate pledge. There are a number of areas that we need to focus on to be able to do this, and we are still on that journey. One is obviously looking at how we lease buildings to ensure they're green leased, to ensure they're of the highest certifications. At the start, you would have seen a video around electric vehicles. We will be transitioning all of our fleet to electric vehicles by 2030. Also, in terms of the buildings that we lease as well, we will be driving down efficiencies, looking at zero waste to landfill, our water consumption, applying new technologies as they come up, as well as circular economy principles. We've actually just finished the design of our new Thai Bangkok office, where we've applied circular principles and achieved the highest level of green building certification. But for us, JLL, The most significant emissions that we have are those associated with the buildings we manage on behalf of our clients. That's our scope 3. Therefore, for us to be able to meet our 2040 target, we need to work very closely in partnership with our clients to help them reduce their emissions. And so in order to do that, we have been building and growing a very strong team of sustainability experts across globally and in Asia Pacific to really work and partner with our clients in driving down their emissions to help them to get to net zero, which in turn will help us to get to net zero. So just in summary, I thought this was a really important slide to put up, but I'm sure I don't need to convince anybody here. There is clearly a very big case for sustainability. It's a win-win for all stakeholders. In my stakeholder, it will increase, in my world, it will increase the value of buildings, enabling higher rents. It will enhance your brand, your reputation. So if you're on the stock market and that has an ESG indices, it will increase your value. It also attracts higher levels of investors who have strong ESG policies, and this is a rapidly growing sector. Also, it secures higher prices that customers are willing to pay if it's aligned to their values. But I wanted to focus a little bit on employees and the value of employees. We've recently done a survey where we got feedback from our clients' employees around the value of sustainability to them. So from our research, it's a huge factor in where an employee decides to work. In fact, nearly 80% of 20 to 30-year-olds want to work for a company that actively involves them in sustainability experts. So we know from research, it's a key factor in retaining and attracting employees and the best of the workforce. It also helps in terms of providing employee volunteering days, establishing eco-champions, urban gardens are all positive things that employees are looking for. So just in closing slides, I wanted to just say, so how do you define your own sustainability strategy? We all know having a robust strategy is critical, and we're seeing many of our clients have a really broad and quite comprehensive sustainability strategy at the corporate level, but there is some confusion how to translate that down to the day-to-day for implementation. So we often advise our clients in a number of key areas. Firstly, really define what does carbon neutral or net zero mean to you, your business, operations, your stakeholders. What are the principles that are going to drive your carbon strategy? Then when you're developing the strategy, ensuring it's flexible enough to encompass emerging technologies, also considering investment instruments and how they will support your strategy. And then importantly, articulate that strategy, especially to your employees and your investors so they understand and they can all be aligned to your strategy and vision. So technology and innovation were obviously central at COP26. They focused dramatically on scaling up clean tech and reducing costs. The built environment was no different. In particular, we saw commitments around concrete zero, steel zero, highlighting the desire to push the net zero carbon conversation beyond operations. And as I've mentioned before, the scale of retrofitting is a huge one. In the next decade, the figures being thrown around that over $5 trillion will need to be invested to decarbonize the built environment and set it on the path to be net zero by 2050. Thought leadership is a really important area for my company. Sharing our knowledge, disclosing our progress is key to our strategy. And so we've done this recently through partnering with organizations such as the World Economic Forum and Bloomberg Green to share our current thinking of how we can get to net zero within our sector, detailing the steps. So I've set up here a number of our research papers. If anyone is interested, please do feel free to take a look. There is much hope coming out of COP26, but obviously nothing can be taken for granted. None of the commitments will matter if they aren't followed up by swift action. This requires radical collaboration, all parties, all people, all companies, all NGOs, and all voices to tackle the climate crisis in an equitable and inclusive way. So at COP27, which is in just 1 year's time, the world will be looking for proof of action and bolder commitments. So in closing, I wanted to share a quote from the amazing Sir David Attenborough, who was at the COP26 conference. "We are, after all, the greatest problem solvers to have ever visited the Earth. If working apart, we are a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together, we are powerful enough to save it." So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll pass back to Mr. Abhijit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was amazing. Lots of very interesting information and insights. I think what we are seeing clearly is that we're no longer talking about sustainability purely in terms of goals, but we're also talking about the structure. The structure around sustainability is clearly building up, so we're talking about processes, tools. You talked a lot about science-based targets, and we'd certainly like our buildings to be trees. That was a good one. And also, we certainly don't want Bangkok to go underwater by 2050, so that's our burning platform right there. So look forward to addressing and talking more about these issues in the Q&A session, Sam, so thank you for that. Next up is our second speaker, Israel Bhiran, and he will talk about healthy and efficient buildings. So please join me in inviting on stage Israel Bhiran. Israel, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to speak in this great event. I'm going to talk with you today about efficient building and how we maintain good indoor air quality and still save energy. Let me share with you my slide. Okay, so I'm the founder of 𝐸𝐴𝐺 System, and we work with a partnership, a great partnership with SCG. So just a few words about 𝐸𝐴𝐺, a company located in Boston, founded in 2010, commercial since 2016. Backed by great investors and partners, including Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is the fund of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and other billionaires to support the reduction in carbon emission and fight the global warming. We have many technologies, many patents around the solvent ventilation technology, which is a clean indoor air technology. We are recognized by many entities and leaders in the industry, specifically won the award for the product of the year from the ASHRAE, which is the body that regulates HVAC in the US and many other countries. We work on the commercial building space and deliver air quality, energy saving, and capital cost savings, working in markets in the US, in Canada, and Israel, and with SCG in Thailand and Singapore. Our main value proposition, and I'll get to that also in my presentation, is reducing CapEx, reducing the cost of HVAC systems, reducing, of course, the operational cost and saving energy, improving indoor air quality, and also providing a lot of green points, LEED or WELL, to commercial buildings. We have two lines of technologies and products. One is the solvent ventilation technology that basically remove gases, filter gases from indoor environment, including CO2 and VOC. Very unique technology, based on a very advanced material sciences. And the other line of technology is filtration for particles. So basically technology that remove any particles, including viruses, from the indoor environment. This is just an example of a classroom with a filtration technology that remove the viruses and particles. These are main market in the US, classrooms, basically providing a safe and healthy classroom with the removal of the viruses. The other technology, the solvent ventilation technology, coming in different modules, including integrated into a large HVAC system. And you can see here the technology integrated into a Daikin HVAC system, basically providing indoor air quality and energy saving. We work with many big clients in the different territory that we are working in. and you see some of our buildings and commercial buildings, office and schools, and also supported by many agencies, specifically in the US. As I say, backed by great partners and investors, including Breakthrough Energy and of course SCG. So let me get into the topic that I want to discuss with you today. Is really what's the new normal in building, or maybe to be more specific, how can we enhance indoor air quality without increasing the energy spent? So how can we make building both healthy and energy efficient? And this is a big issue, and these two things basically typically contradict each other. And the old paradigm before COVID, the way buildings are designed today, and we hope this will change post-COVID. But the idea was that in order to keep the indoor air quality good, there's need to be a lot of air coming from the outside. So typically the best air quality would be achieved if in every hour the air inside a classroom like that will be changed 3 to 5 times. So really bringing a lot of air from the outside to dilute the contaminants that are creating indoor. This is a typical approach that was used and still used in commercial buildings. The problem with that is that all this outside air is very costly. And you see here at different levels of outside air, how the energy use intensity increase, and of course the dollar. So as you go and increase your outside air, you're spending more and more energy, of course, carbon, but also it costs a lot of money. The other problem with the approach that is currently used in building is that the air outside is not as clean as it used to be. So before, in the HVAC industry, the outside air was called fresh air, and as we all know today, this is not fresh anymore. Right, with all the pollutants from the traffic, from airplanes, from factories, actually the air outside is polluted. But still, the many buildings are designed to bring this polluted air from the outside in order to maintain good indoor air quality, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. So what is the solution? And this is something that was really enhanced during the COVID. And made a lot of people think about the indoor air quality. Talking about the virus in the air really required to think about the solution and the way we are ventilating building and the way we are maintaining the good indoor air quality. And really at the end, the conclusion, and this is Bill Benefeld, which is the past president of ASHRAE, and actually was the chair of the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force. So he's the guy that was making the decision about HVAC in buildings in the US and many other countries. The conclusion now is that we have to find an alternative to ventilation, alternative to the way we used to bring a lot of outside air from the outside. So a way that will enable to keep building healthy, but also not spend so much energy. So really, we are talking now about a new paradigm or a new normal. And the parameters that affect that is there's three parameters that we need to take into account. One is affected by COVID, right? We need to make sure the indoor environment is safe and healthy. And then there's the climate crisis, right? We cannot just spend a lot of energy in order to achieve the first parameter of healthy buildings. So we cannot just bring a lot of outside air that we need to cool in a hot and humid environment or heat in a very cold environment and just produce a lot of carbon and carbon emission. And then the other parameters that need to be taken into account is the pollution in the outside air. The outside air is polluted either from pollution from industry or vehicles or from wildfire. So the solution of bringing polluted air from the outside is not correct. So really we need to have a new approach that will enable to have good indoor air quality without energy intensive solutions. And the solution for that is a combination of filtration and air cleaning, a very advanced filtration and air cleaning of indoor air cleaning, which will be combined with a little bit of outside air. And this will enable to achieve both air quality and the energy goals of our society and of course of every company. So this is what we call the clean first approach to achieve both sustainable IAQ without spending a lot of energy. So first would be, of course, to set the goal, right? We want to have what's the air quality we want to have, the indoor air quality, what's our green goals, is it LEED, well, what's the standard that we are planning to use in our building. So once we set that, we can implement the solution for that, the solution that will not require a lot of energy, and this will be a combination of air cleaning and of course a little bit of outside air. And the step 4 is of course to monitor that, so to make sure not only on the design stage of buildings or the design of the project, but also make sure that the systems and everything is working correctly over time and actually producing and achieving the goals that we set for our building. So and 𝐵𝑟𝑒𝑑 is in this second phase of providing the air cleaning solution that will enable to reduce the energy spent on ventilation, and the solvent ventilation technology enabled to basically clean all the contaminants that are created indoor. And as you see in this picture, there's many contaminated created, some from people, and the most significant one is CO2. So people are breathing CO2, producing it to the air. It has to be cleaned from the air, either by dilution or cleaning. And our technology is cleaning CO2, which is very unique and advanced technology, but also other gases that are emitted from furnitures, computers. So anything that is emitted into the air need to be cleaned either by air cleaners like our product, the HLR, or by air from the outside. So a combination of those two will enable to have a sustainable indoor air quality. Just a few words about our product. This is our product. It's a size of a home refrigerator. It has a special filters with a special sorbent, special material inside that can very efficiently capture CO2 and other indoor gases and basically clean them, so enable a very good indoor air quality without bringing a lot of outside air. There's multiple products. They are connected to the system in different locations, either in the floors or on the roof, and by a very easy integration into a building HVAC system, it enabled to achieve the goal of clean indoor air. Just a few examples in a high rise, in an office space in New York City, multiple of these units are serving the full building. Just one example maybe of the effect of this kind of approach and our technology. This is an office building outside Boston with 8 HLR model, which is our product for cleaning the indoor air, really with the goal to decrease energy and maintain or keep good indoor air quality. So once our systems were installed, there was immediate reduction in the outside air that is brought into the building. Specifically in this location is located near a very big highway. So the air outside is pretty polluted. So reduction of the outside air, of course, help not to bring pollution from the outside. And the air quality in the building was maintained at a very high quality. This is a CO2 level between 700 to 1000 ppm, which indicate very good indoor air quality. And of course, most important, the energy was reduced by almost 80%. The energy consumption, saving in kWh, of course in dollars, reduced 117 tons. So all these benefits basically from bringing much less outside air, and also this is a very economical project with a less than 3-year payback. So we believe that this is an approach that should be implemented in as many buildings as possible to enable both indoor air quality without spending too much on energy. This approach was tested by many government entities, including the Department of Energy and different utilities in the US, which are starting to adopt it. Of course, by ASHRAE, which is the main regulator body, and now recommending this technology to be implemented instead of the more energy consumed approach. The technology is implemented in commercial buildings, basically a large commercial buildings, again in the US, and together with our partners from SCG. And really to summarize, and the take-home message here is that there is a way to keep building healthy and safe without spending energy and without producing a lot of carbon emission from buildings. And the way to do it is by advanced technologies, advanced filtration technologies that can both clean gases or remove the gases that need to be removed from the indoor air, and also other particles and viruses. So once you have that, you don't need to bring a lot of outside air. You can save a lot of energy and have buildings with good IAQ, sustainable, and with less carbon emission. Thank you very much, and we'll be happy to answer questions on the follow-up discussion.
Thank you so much, Israel. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about the apparent contradiction between the goals of healthy buildings on the one hand and efficient buildings on the other. So we were trying to bring in the external air to reduce energy consumption, but now that external air is not fresh. So that's the challenge that you're working on, and it's great to know that Enverit is working on phase 2 of this, and I'm sure we will talk more about this during the Q&A panel. So finally, next up is our third speaker for today, Alex Bettencourt, and Alex will talk about electric vehicles or clean mobility or fleet electrification. So please join me in welcoming on stage Alex Bettencourt. Alex, please.
Thank you, Mr. Dato. And thank you for inviting me to be here in Bangkok with you. And thank you to SCG International for hosting this event for us. My name is Alex Bettencourt, and I'm with Black & Veatch. And so what I hope with the session is to sort of tie in some of the themes that we've already heard this morning together about sustainability and how companies are moving towards sustainability and what that means in real terms, as well as with air quality and how we see fleet electrification playing a role in that. For those of you who don't know, Black & Veatch is a large global engineering firm. We're headquartered in Kansas City, and we have around 8,000 professionals around the world. And we've always focused on what we call critical human infrastructure: power, water, telecommunications. And with that experience, we were lucky enough to be real pioneers in the electric vehicle industry. When Tesla built out its first supercharger network in the US, they asked Black & Veatch to be their engineer, and we built out hundreds and hundreds of their sites. And we're currently building out Electrify America's network in the US as well. We've taken that experience, and we're building some of the highest power EV charging around the world, in Europe and Asia and around North America. And we've paired that with our skills in building solar and energy storage, and we're pulling all that together to meet that sustainability challenge that Sam laid out earlier today. Today, I'm going to talk about fleet electrification and what that means for the companies that SCG works with and many of the people who are participating in this webinar serve, and where are the opportunities there. When Tesla in 2017 announced that they're going to roll out a Tesla Semi, it really made the entire trucking industry stand up and pay attention. They saw this upstart, and this is 5 years ago now, who was just making a few cars at the time. They didn't have a market capitalization of $1 trillion, but they said, hey, we think we can build a better truck. We think it'll be more efficient, and we think that it's going to have a big impact on the market. At the time, a lot of the traditional trucking companies said, oh, that's not possible. You'll never be able to make enough batteries light enough to run a truck. But what we've seen over the last few years is Daimler, who's the biggest truck maker in the world, has announced their line of electric trucks, and we're starting to see them hit the roads this year. And we see new upstarts like Line Electric enter the market with trucks specifically for yard tractors, heavy duty. And so this is becoming a real opportunity. Commercially available trucks are coming onto the market, and where are the opportunities there? A lot of this has been enabled by just the drop in battery prices over the year. You think of an electric vehicle needing a 200 kilowatt hour battery, 300 kilowatt hour battery. An electric truck needs something far more than that in order to do its daily routes. And the fall in battery prices has made that possible. And we see global EV adoption, and that EV adoption isn't just happening with passenger vehicles, but it's going to be happening across all the different vehicle classes. And so this was a Bloomberg New Energy Finance projection. And what we're seeing when we run the economics and talking with our clients, we think we're going to accelerate from the numbers that we see here. All of this is driving towards overall mega trends in transportation, right? Not only will electric fleets be more competitive than diesel fleets, but that's going to drive a lot of demand for new green power to fuel those fleets. And those fleets, those vehicles, will start becoming connected. They'll start transmitting terabytes of information back to their fleet operations headquarters, between each other, between the vehicle and the roadway. And we're seeing moves into autonomous vehicles. We don't see autonomous vehicles entering the busy streets of Bangkok anytime soon, but we see the technology being fairly available and probably working today about getting from one city to another along major highways. And we see that regulatory change will happen over the next few years that will allow autonomous trucks to move from one city to the next. And while it might seem a little space age, a little Jetsons, we are starting to work on electric aviation projects, both for fixed-wing aircraft and vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. And we see great opportunities in electric aviation in reducing emissions, especially with short regional flights. So one of the things that Mr. Datta mentioned right at the beginning was disruption and the opportunity associated with that disruption. And when we think about, and this is a US example, about $1 billion a day is spent on gasoline and diesel in the US, and about $1 billion a day is spent on power. And there's an opportunity to transfer a massive amount of value and wealth from the traditional oil and gas companies to the power companies and the other partners who take advantage of this disruption. This transformation is occurring across transportation, and it's being driven by the things that we talked about, but it's also being driven by sustainability. You know, one of the things Sam talked about was companies are really paying attention to their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And we're working with many of the Fortune 100 companies on helping them implement their sustainability. And what we see is that they do the easy thing first. And the easiest thing you can do to make your sustainability is to start buying green power, right? You sign a contract, you pay a few more cents per kilowatt hour, or maybe even at par for the kilowatt hour, and you're able to reduce the amount of emissions from the power you use. The second thing that we're seeing large companies do is look at their fleets, how they handle logistics, and moving from a diesel fleet to an electric fleet, requiring your suppliers to move from diesel vehicles to electric vehicles, is the second tier that we're seeing companies go after when they're trying to drive their sustainabilities. And then the third tier, the most hard tier, is them going right into their operations and changing their processes and swapping out their factories. And they are getting there, but we see fleet electrification as being the second tier after they started to purchase renewable power. So there's a lot of reasons why companies are going to be doing this. We see some of the world's largest companies already make dedications to electrification of their vehicles, but this is going to be a much easier transition if it also pencils out. So I want to talk about the economics of fleet electrification, because we see economics in most markets around the world starting to improve. That's going to drive this change just on a business case perspective. The capital costs of these vehicles are higher, and the spread between a diesel vehicle and an electric vehicle is about, it's coming around a 30 or 40% premium. We expect that spread to decline over time as we get economies of scale on both battery production and on vehicle production, but it still is a bigger upfront capital cost in terms of both the vehicle as well as the charging infrastructure. But when you compare that to the operating costs, there is still significant savings to be realized, right? On the fuel side, and this is in Ontario, I'm from Toronto myself, and so this is a case study from the province of Ontario where Toronto is located in Canada. And so when we look at the fuel costs there, it's about 42 cents per kilometer to run a diesel truck. And when we compare that to the cost of electricity, and the cost of electricity in Ontario is a pretty middle-tiered price market, it goes from anywhere between 10 cents to 23 cents depending on the time that you use your power. And with that, we believe that the move from diesel to an electric can save a significant amount of money. There's also the savings that come from maintenance, right? An electric vehicle has far less moving parts. There's no oil change. There's no sparks plugs. There's no emission systems. And just brakes, electric motors, windshield washers, that is where the maintenance is. And we think that there'll be significant maintenance savings. And when even you add in the cost of charging, and we've built a lot of charging, so we have a good perspective on how much that is, we're still seeing savings in fleet electrification of anywhere between 7 and 23%. Now, logistics is a tight margin business. Many of these companies are working on 5, 6% margin. And so their ability to reduce their costs by 7% is doubling their profits. It would also make those fleets far more competitive when bidding for projects and bidding for logistics contracts with many of those Fortune 500 companies that have sustainability goals. And so we see both pressures on just the pure economics of running a cheaper electric fleet, as well as the demand associated with sustainable logistics increasing over time. All of those economics is going to create new flows of value, right? That disruption creates, and Mr. Datta used a great word, white space of opportunity, around where the money used to flow. It used to flow to the mechanics, it used to flow to the vehicle makers, and it flowed to the oil companies. And in this new electric model, there are many more players that need to get involved. And while people think that a lot of the money is going to flow to the power companies, about what we found when we studied it is about half the money that gets spent on oil and gas is going to be spent on the power. But there's all these new opportunities around service providers, the builders of the charging infrastructure like Black & Veatch, the makers of the chargers like ChargePoint and Greenlots and ABB, the people who are going to maintain and operate all these systems and all the software associated with that. There's going to create new flows of value. And you can see from SCG's presentation right at the beginning, they see the opportunity here in trying to capture some of this value for themselves. You can't treat all fleets the same. There are different parameters for each of the fleets that you see on this screen, and it's important to ensure that your economics work. One of the areas that we see probably the best opportunity in the short term, and it's because the capital cost isn't so much more expensive, is on delivery fleets. Many places around the world have seen this increase in last mile delivery. We see those vans, when we pencil out the economics, as being really good business cases for fleet electrification. The vans spend a lot of time stopped. They're going back to the same spot every single night. They have an opportunity to charge overnight when electricity is typically cheaper. And so we see the economics around delivery fleets being very good. There are some markets in the world where you have some incentives and where the power pricing is in the right structure, where even medium duty and heavy duty fleets make good economic sense. And the other area that we've started to see recently is that in ports, airports, marine ports, rail yards, and the vehicles that run around those ports, they spend a lot of time stopped. And so by moving them from diesel to electric allows those ports to hit their sustainability goals as well as for them to save money. Like I said, today, not all these business cases pencil out, but there are enough business cases, enough use cases, and enough jurisdictions that pencil out today that makes the economics of fleet electrification work. And then you can see just below that green section there that there's many jurisdictions and many use cases that with a bit of improvement either in increased oil prices, which is happening now, decreased power prices, which will happen over time as solar and solar becomes a bigger part of our power grids, or government incentives that can really improve the business case and move many of those dots up into the green where it's positive both from a TCO efficiency perspective and from a business case perspective. So all this new flow of value is creating new entrants, right? Because battery costs are moving down, sustainability is accelerating, governments around the world are trying to make this a valuable and central part of their policy, and the vehicles are just getting better and charging is getting faster. That all that inertia is forcing new businesses to enter this opportunity. And we're seeing a glowing list of providers, right? There are many people, many large fleets who are starting to electrify their fleets themselves. We're seeing the oil and gas companies who see the future trying to get into this new charging infrastructure. We see the makers of the vehicles themselves and the large leasing companies of vehicles get into this business. The power companies, instead of the oil and gas company providing the energy in this equation, it's the power companies that are going to provide the energy in this equation. We're seeing them enter the market. And then we're seeing entirely new energy providers, right? People who spotted the opportunity, are investing the capital, and are going to enter the market. And we think that the ones who are going to win in this market is really going to be around the financial model, right? So who has good financial models? Who's able to amortize the cost of the charging infrastructure over the longest period of time? Who has established relationships in the market? Right? The power company really hasn't been in the vehicle market before. How are they going to convince the Amazons of the world and the Pepsis of the world to go electrification and electrify their fleets with them? Location, where you have this infrastructure is going to be important. It has to be where the vehicles are going. And then who can get to the market at speed? We see real regulations driving this market forward, right? Just in California as a case study, there's something called the California Air Resources Board, and they manage the air pollution in Los Angeles. And if you remember in the 1980s, you would see pictures of Los Angeles and it would be entirely covered in smog. And the California Air Resources Board, over the course of successive regulations over the last 30 years, have cleaned that up. They've changed out the vehicles so that those vehicles don't emit all that PM2.5 and nitrous oxide. But now they're going to move towards getting those vehicles not to emit any CO2 as well. We're seeing mandates that any warehouse is going to have electric vehicle infrastructure on site, electric vehicles moving out of those warehouses. If not, there's going to be penalties associated with that. We're seeing a lot of mandates around by 2035, half the trucks in California are going to have to be electric, outright bans on diesel vehicles. And we're seeing many other states in the US market match their lead. In other jurisdictions around the world, we're seeing regulations around zero emission zones in the centers of cities. And we think that's going to force logistics companies to swap out fleets from electric to diesel in order to meet those regulations. Black & Veatch has many resources. You can download them at that URL around fleet decarbonization if this is something that you're interested in and want to learn more. And with that, I'll pass it back to Mr. Datta for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Alex. We clearly saw the promise of electrification and how it's been developing over a period of time. And with all these interesting things happening, both on the technology side and on the commitment side, and you talked a bit about the economics as well, these will be interesting points to talk about during the panel discussion. So based on these three very interesting perspectives that we have, one from the world of real estate and workspace, the other from the point of view of healthy and efficient buildings, and the last one, electrification of fleets. Let's now get into a very interesting session of discussions where we will engage with our three speakers and try to talk about three major issues. One is how can businesses play a role in actually converting some of these goals into action and implementing. And we'll also talk about the issues and challenges that we faced. And we'll try to cap it up in the end, if we have enough time, by asking our speakers about what their vision is for the future. So let me first of all start with you, Sam. And you talked a lot about how these trends are playing out. You talked about COP26. You even talked about how employees are going to influence this by preferring an employer that is actually sustainability oriented. The question is, how do you think, what kind of a role do you think businesses like SCG or even other large businesses, what kind of a role can we play to actually accelerate this trend? And if you have some practical applications to share with us, then that would be great.
Sure, thanks. It's a good question. Look, I think there's many ways that a company like SCG and others can contribute. I would say from my perspective, an important element is acting as a thought leader. So being transparent in your journey, your achievements and your actions, and disclosing your findings so that other companies can learn and build from your activities. I also think education is critical. Education of your partners, your employees, obviously educating your employees will help them participate in your sustainability strategy, and also your customers. And I think sharing successes, achievements and failures is all part of the process. And as you mentioned, employees want to feel part of the process. So if you engage them in the journey, I think that will be a big plus for the success of your strategy. And the other area potentially, I think that companies like SCG can get involved in is obviously lobbying for change. Carbon pricing, greening the grid, those are very, very big issues that would take a whole other session to discuss. But maybe my final point would be around investing in new and emerging technologies. There are, as most of the panelists have already talked about, there's some really interesting startups and unicorns out there looking at low carbon alternatives. Israel gave a great presentation on the emerging air quality tech out there. You know, there's some really interesting technology around hydrogen options, obviously carbon capture and storage, and nature-based solutions. So it'll be really important for leading companies to go beyond and aim for that net positive. So taking more of the emissions out than they put in. So, we're looking at the likes of Microsoft and Google and even, Coldplay, the band, all investing in companies like Climeworks. It's the world's first CO2 removal. So I think, there's lots and lots of different areas that you can focus on, but for the larger companies, I really think it is about placing yourself there as a thought leader and investing in the space so others can learn.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Sam. Let me now turn to you, Israel. You talked a lot about the technology behind the healthy and efficient buildings. The question is that sometimes the technology is out there, but what's also important is business players need to actually get in and play the right role to actually implement this. So the question is, what do you think, what kind of a role can businesses, of course, SCG is working alongside with Enverit, but in general, what kind of a role can businesses play to actually accelerate this trend towards healthy and efficient buildings? Israel, please.
Yeah, sure. So definitely there's a big role for large companies, and SCG is an example, actually a very good example, working with SCG. And I'll join Sam and specifically from a point of view of a technology innovator, the need for companies like SCG to help to adapt this technology is critical. So new technology in any field is really hard to push into markets. There's a lot of resistance to new technology, and although this is for very good reasons, and many people are understanding the problem of climate change, still at the end of the day, people are resistant, are very conservative, and it's really hard to push these kind of technologies. And this is where large companies can be very important. As an example, these companies, and I'm happy again that working with SCG actually doing that, they can be the first adopter. So it's always hard to get the first adopters, and if these companies can be the first adopter, can take the risk and install the technology within their, in our example, in their buildings, this is setting a great example to the market. And it's hard because the first installation, the first projects are always expensive. You cannot go only by ROI, right? You cannot just say, okay, this technology need to get a payback of 2 or 3 years, and this is the only way I'm going to install it. No, you need to take a risk on the first projects and say this is a larger ROI, which will go down with time. But we need to help technology companies to push and to get into market. And in addition to that, large companies, and again maybe repeating Sam, but this is very important, can help with all the lobbying and the regulation and helping with governments to push these technologies because they have the connections, they have the power. And they need to help in these very early stages of technology adoption. And I'll just finally say that I also concur, Sam, that it's important that within the companies, the employees and everyone will be supportive to this kind of technology, and this is coming from the company culture. Really, employee and partner education and awareness is really a key to help the adoption of the technologies.
Thank you so much, Israel. And just like Alex, you also spoke about the financial models. And that is so critical. We have to get the economics right, and which is where business can play a role. And very often we look at the capital expenditure, the CapEx, and that is indeed substantial. but how can we structure it in a way, for example, it could be servitization, there could be so many other ways. We could look at total cost of ownership. And all of these things become extremely important in terms of converting these into real actions. So let me now turn to you, Alex, and the question is, why now, right? So we've been talking about electric vehicles for a while, and from your presentation, it was very clear that you're looking at it pretty optimistically in terms of the timing. So the question is, why do you think this is the right time when some of these electrification projects that we've been talking about for a while will actually start happening? And where do you see the opportunities, especially in Thailand, but also broadly within the Southeast Asian region?
Sure. So, I've been working in the EV space myself since 2017. And in 2017, I was too early. But what we're seeing now is we are seeing these vehicles become commercially available into the market. There's not going to be and what we're seeing is there's not nearly enough vehicles for the demand. There's a lot of companies with sustainability goals. There's Tesla can't make enough trucks, Daimler can't make enough trucks, Rivian can't make enough trucks to satisfy Amazon's demand over the next 2 or 3 years. Those companies will ramp up their productions. But when you think about electric charging, you can't just buy the vehicle. You actually have to put in the charging infrastructure, and that can take time, especially at a high-powered site. And so our advice to people is that you can't just go out and buy a vehicle and expect to use it. You sort of have to plan out probably 18 months in advance at a minimum to A, get yourself on a wait list for those vehicles, and then B, plan out, especially if it's a warehouse or logistics facility or a port, where are you going to put the charging, working with the utility to get enough power there. And so all those things take time. To the second part of your question is well, what's the opportunity in Southeast Asia? I remember when COVID first struck in Toronto, I noticed birds, probably for the first time ever in my life. I noticed that there was a lot more birds. And I was like, is it because there was all that noise pollution and I didn't hear them before? Was it because there was less air pollution and they came out? And all of us, all around the world, had that experience of walking out on our streets and realizing, oh, this is what it's like if there wasn't, vehicles going around all the time with both the noise and air pollution associated with that. And so I think in Southeast Asia specifically, where you have a lot of vehicles in a small area where there's been lots of traffic, I think the move to electrification can really help reduce both noise pollution and air pollution in a way that, I've demonstrated that we think it's economic, it's good for these companies to go electric, it's going to meet their sustainability goals, we think it's going to save them money, but it also has a great social impact on improving the lives of the cities. One thing in, the American market has spent a lot of time building electric vehicle infrastructure. There's a lot of people in single-family homes, big suburban homes that you see in the movies. They have a garage, they have a place to charge their vehicle. Operating a Tesla supercharger network and all the other people building those charging hubs, that's a tough business, right? You don't really need a charger unless you're going on a road trip someplace, right? Most of the time you can charge at home. But in Southeast Asia, that's not the building model. People don't have single-family homes and garages, right? And so we believe that charging hubs, places that are allowed to charge, taxis or people's vehicles or people's motorbikes, and these delivery vans, we think that we're going to see far higher utilization at those charging hubs, and we think that's probably a great opportunity in the Southeast Asian market.
Absolutely. So the devil's in the details, right? So as both you and I said, the white space is out there. There's an opportunity. But then where do you go? Do you go for the heavier vehicles where the technology is still got a while to go? Or do you go for the lighter vehicles? How do you do with the charging? How do you make sure that the utilization of the fleet is the best and the optimum? So there's all of that. Thank you for that, Alex. And let's move on to the second round where we'll try and address the challenges. So we've got a bit of clarity now about the goals. We've got a bit of clarity about what role businesses can play. But there's obviously a lot of challenges. So let me start with you first, Sam, and ask you, where do you see the key challenges in the world of real estate that you're involved in terms of converting these great buildings into trees, as you said? Where are the real challenges? If you could share some thoughts on that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, maybe I'll just start off by saying, like, most companies occupy our own businesses and buildings in some shape or another, be it a data center, a hotel, an office. So everybody has a carbon footprint that can be reduced, and meaning, you know, we can all play a role in this climate crisis. And there are quite a few drivers depending on the location. So if we think about the drivers, it could be legislation, it could be investor pressure that I mentioned before, it could be around demand from your employees or customers. I mean, as Alex has just discussed, there's a massive growth in electric vehicles because customers are demanding it and people are becoming more and more responsible. I think it's widely accepted now, it's the right thing to do for future generations. You know, companies are placing ESG and sustainability front and center in their businesses. Businesses that are doing that are demonstrating, you know, by being a purpose-driven company, you can also be a profitable one. And purpose-driven companies witness higher market share gains. You know, they can grow up to 3 times faster on average than their competitors, whilst achieving, you know, higher workforce and customer satisfaction. So when we think about the challenges, of course, there are going to be challenges with any change like this. You know, it might be put in the too hard bucket. It might be due to lack of resources or investment or even management support on the why. But when I think about the built environment, really the challenge is related to the growth in demand. Developers just can't keep up with, you know, the demand for carbon neutral buildings. So industry really needs to look at its existing buildings, and that is a big challenge. So retrofitting, and this is going to take huge investment and the support of new technology as it becomes available. So I feel that that's an area that, you know, we'll have to focus on over the upcoming years, and it will rely on future technologies as well.
Thank you, Sam. Turning to you, Israel, on challenges, I think you talked a lot about the healthy and the efficient buildings. But I'd like to explore a little bit more with you about how the situation has changed after the COVID pandemic, because prior to that, there was a lot of focus on the external air, and that has taken a completely different dimension with COVID. So how do you address those challenges, as you clearly pointed out in your presentations, between healthy and efficient, and where do you see the real problems and the opportunities, Israel?
Yeah, sure. So definitely COVID is posing a challenge on this concept that you can achieve a great energy saving with actually reducing the outside air, because there was when the pandemic started, people and also many experts were recommending to actually bring a lot of air from the outside in the building. So I mean, the fear was that there's viruses in the building, and in order to reduce the amount of viruses, you need to bring a lot of outside air. So this is a challenge now to saving energy, because you reduce the amount of outside air. But you know, every challenge brings an opportunity, and we and many other in the industry, we were really taking the scientific approach and really researching that. Definitely bodies like ASHRAE in the US, and also leading universities like Harvard and MIT really understood that this is a big problem. There's a big tension, right, between bringing a lot of outside air in order to mitigate the COVID, and the much bigger problem that we have with the challenges of climate change, and the fact that bringing a lot of outside air actually increase significantly the amount of energy that building will require, and also is actually not healthy, because actually the air outside is polluted. So So really, with time, a lot of research was done, and we were involved with that. And the idea today is that actually the best approach for both having healthy buildings and saving energy, which is the key, is filtration and I would say technology. So basically, the technology today, and this is not a new technology, it's actually very traditional filtration technology in any building can mitigate much better the COVID and in a much better controlled way without the need to bring air from the outside and to waste a lot of energy. So this is really the common recommendation between all the leading entities. And there's a challenge now to educate both the public and the expert in that, but this is definitely the approach. I would say on the flip side of that, the opportunity is that there's a lot of awareness now that wasn't before COVID to indoor air quality. So before, this is not a topic of high priority, but today people understand that when they look at the building, you know, either if you are a developer, a design, or even a tenant in a building, you want to understand what's in your building, what's the building owner is doing in order to keep the building healthy, but also not waste energy. So then this is the opportunity where you can get technology like ours or technology that mitigate both, because there is a demand. There is a demand from tenants, from companies that now asking questions and want to make sure that their building is operated at the best way from both perspectives, both health and energy conservation. So we see a lot of interest in that and a lot of emphasis on both subjects, which is good, because now we and the technology that we have are taking a much more important part in the decision making of buildings.
Thank you, Israel. Every challenge is an opportunity. Love that. And I know that your organization is working hard with the technology, and I'm sure that you will be able to come up with solutions and communicate those to us. Turning to you, Alex, on challenges on electrification, I think we must talk about charging. When we do surveys here in Thailand, then mostly, I believe, like in most countries, people are all excited about electrification, whether it's in the B2B or in the B2C segment. But people do have worries about charging because this is totally new. And what do I do if my car is just stuck in the middle and there's no charging station around? Is the electricity going to be stable enough, and so on? So maybe you want to share your thoughts on that.
Sure. It's definitely a fear. You know, we saw this great study out of Japan. It was one of the first van fleets to electrify. And what happened is, you know, most vehicles, especially, you know, vehicles that are part of a company's fleet, return back to the same place every night. And this Japanese company, you know, the people would take out their vehicles, but they wouldn't go very far. They'd go maybe 15, 20 kilometers, but they always felt like they couldn't go any further because they were worried that they would run out of power. And this was early technology, so the batteries weren't that big. So the company installed chargers, you know, at that 15-kilometer mark away from the depot. And then people started to use those vehicles, and they went 40 or 50 kilometers, and they never used those charging infrastructures. They just needed the comfort that it was there if need be. And so what we see is it's going to be hard to electrify long-haul trucking, right? To go from the north of Thailand to the south of Thailand in an electric vehicle is not going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. But it doesn't need to, right? There's a lot of use cases in the short term that really are well served by just, you know, charging the vehicles where they park every night. And there's not going to be enough vehicles to satisfy all the demand. And so what we see is there are many really simple, easy business cases where there's enough time for that vehicle to charge. It can do its entire operational range and come back still with enough power. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that for last mile delivery. We're seeing it for drayage from ports to warehouses. We're seeing it for public transit. And so that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I'd say is power is already everywhere, right? You know, everything mostly in most parts of the world has electricity. It might not be enough to entirely electrify everything, but most places have enough to start. And as long as you give the power utility the notice, they can build additional infrastructure, right? This is good for them because it's allowing them to sell more power. It's allowing them to amortize the entire cost of their grid over more kilowatt hours. But the main thing is just to start early. And one thing I'd probably want to see from both government perspective and regulation perspective is, you know, we've studied these in different markets, and you know, the amount of electricity that's going to be needed to entirely electrify transportation over the next 25 years means that there's going to have to be a 30 to 50% jump in the amount of power required. That's a lot of power, and that's only 25 years in order to provide it. And so we see, you know, great advances in renewable technology. It's going to provide for cheap, abundant power, but the power grid to move it also needs to be invested, and those are not short-term things, right? You can't just build a new transmission line, right? There's a lot of stakeholding that's involved, a lot of land that needs to be bought. And so what I'd like to see is all those plans to start now, knowing that in 2025 and 2030, we're going to see all this additional demand for power.
Absolutely. And there's also, I guess, a cultural aspect to it, right? Different countries are going to react differently to the charging issues, especially in the B2C segment, right? There's some where they want to charge only at home and they don't want to depend on the public infrastructure. In other cases, they want to have two cars, one's EV, the other one's, so there's all of that that goes in. Our speakers are doing greatly, very well on time, in the sense that we've almost utilized all of the time that was available. But we do want to have one lightning final round where we can get your thoughts on your vision for what's going to happen 5 years from now as you see it. So let's have a lightning round with all of you, starting with Sam, on what you see in the future 5 years from now. Paint a picture for us, please.
It's a great question. I don't have a crystal ball, but my sense is obviously the built environment has the ability to be a real agent of change, and buildings are so focused to everything we do. We work, we live, we sleep, we play. So if the sector can really embrace sustainability, we can potentially address some of the sustainability challenges we're currently facing. The workplace will be a hybrid one moving forward. We've learned that from COVID, and companies have already started to rethink the way their employees experience their work, and they've begun shifting the focus towards creating more positive and impactful company cultures. You know, employees want to come to work to collaborate, to get inspiration, motivation from their colleagues, but have a sense of community and inclusivity. And as I think you suggested earlier, it's important to connect and share ideas. But if the building isn't providing that, they will either remain working from home or seek alternative options. So really design will be key, ensuring that that physical space promotes light, airy access to indoor or outdoor plants, flexible working arrangements. Employees will want access to the best technology, and that's likely to be AI. Buildings will need to be smart. As my colleagues mentioned before, they will need to be safe, but also healthy in body and mind. So the new workplace will definitely need to be designed with a net zero carbon in mind, from the materials it's constructed with to the design, the fit out, how it's operated. But if I could go one step further and say, you know, buildings of the future, as I mentioned before, they could sequester carbon, moving from that neutral space to that carbon positive space. And you know, we saw the energy tree, or the Terra, at the recent Dubai Expo, which was made of something like 97% recycled steel, self-sufficient in water, electricity, supported by solar panels. So it really shows you what is possible. And that was in the desert. So we can definitely see there will be a major shift to smarter, more sustainable, more technology advanced workplaces that are aligned to employee values, and they will be part of the solution.
Thank you, Sam. How about you, Israel? What's your vision for healthy and efficient buildings 5 years from now? And if you could focus on Southeast Asia or Thailand, that would be lovely.
Yeah, sure. Great question. You know, I'll start with a more pessimistic view. We're just going to have more and more challenges, right? The urbanization, the continue of global warming together with increased pollution, and you know, specifically in our field in air conditioning. There's this vicious cycle because as people, and specifically in Southeast Asia, are getting more and more air conditioning, you get more and more energy requirement, more and more global warming. So you know, really challenging the next decade to mitigate all that, and while increasing the demand and the adoption of air conditioning, which is a big energy consumer, but you know, there will be just a greater need to mitigate that. And again, as a technology person, as a great believer in technology, I agree with Sam that the solution will be technologies. So. And there's many technologies now in the early development stage that we're aware of that would mitigate that in the different segments of the built environment and HVAC, starting from a new concept for air conditioning and new approaches for building construction, for design of building, materials, and new sensors, and that are connected to AI and robotics. So all of these approaches will need to work together. There's no silver bullets. There will be a need to multiple technologies to address different segments, and putting this all together with the other thing that we discussed before, with the support of the whole chain here, all the community, you know, starting from the large companies and the individual people and government. So this all will need to work together to mitigate the real big challenges that we're going to have. So on one hand, I'm not too optimistic because we'll just have continue the problem and the issue of global warming, just that will become worse. But from the other hand, I'm very optimistic because we know from our past that the technology play a key role, and I'm sure with the technology, or in this case with the combination of few different technologies, we can achieve the goal of a more sustainable and less climate change in the next decade.
Great, thank you, Israel. So let's say slightly tapered optimism there from Israel, and technology is the solution, of course. How about you, Alex? Paint us a landscape 5 years from now.
I see, especially in Southeast Asia, I see there being more and more zero emission zones, right? Parts of the city where you won't be able to enter with a vehicle that has emissions, right? And what that's going to drive is a lot of electrification of those, you know, those vehicles driving in and out of the city for deliveries, garbage, transit. You know, we also see, you know, electrification of motorbikes and taxis. And the one thing is, like, you know, people buy a vehicle and they expect to use it for, you know, 8, 10, 12 years. And so, you know, we're not going to force, you know, someone who bought a brand new gas-powered or diesel-powered vehicle this year, nobody's going to force them to throw it out in 5 years from now. But what we'll probably see is that 5 years from now, you know, if a company is buying a new vehicle, they're no longer going to buy a diesel vehicle. They will only buy an electric vehicle because they know that, you know, 10 years from then, you know, it's 2038. And they see the writing on the wall from a regulatory perspective. And so I see a real acceleration of the electric vehicles over that time, and companies really making, you know, every new vehicle I buy will likely be an EV vehicle. I also think the technology, you know, we talked about technology a lot, charging is going to get faster, right? It's not going to take you all night to charge those vehicles. It's going to get shorter and shorter and shorter. And so that traditional model of you going into a gas station and filling up in 3 or 4 minutes. I don't think it's going to get 3 or 4 minutes, but it's going to get like 15, 20 minutes type technology. And I think that really solves a lot of the operational problems of that transition.
Wow. So that's emission-free zones, faster charging,
Yes.
new technology. Great. Thanks a lot for that, Alex. So all good things have to come to an end. That's all the time that we have. I'd like to thank all our speakers, Sam, Israel, and Alex. We've had excellent insights from all three of you from the specific industries that you come from. And I think the messages that you have conveyed to us are absolutely clear. For me, I would say that what the message that I carry from this is that sustainability is not merely a purpose. Of course, it has been for a while. There have been commitments, and we are all committed to it. But today, we also see the economics behind it. We see the details behind it. We see the tools behind it. And so it's something that is more practical, something that is clearly reachable, and that's the exciting thing. And so wherever you are, whatever business you're in, I'm sure there's something that you will find useful coming out of this. So once again, thanks a lot to our speakers, and thank you very much in the audience for participating with us. Thank you so much. สวัสดีครับ